In a world as disciplined as the military, who will protect the soldiers when they themselves are harmed by their comrades and superiors, the very people they are supposed to trust unconditionally? When the solemn oath to defend the nation echoes in grand ceremonies, who will stand up for these soldiers in their moments of vulnerability? How can a soldier endure not only the pain from battles on the front lines, but also the struggles within their own ranks? The military, where every soldier must live and fight under strict principles, a place where discipline and responsibility are held above all else, how is it possible that invisible dangers can creep in amid the intense training hours? Those grueling days of relentless drills may seem impenetrable in their seriousness, yet beneath that surface, there are unseen undercurrents, silent threats that no one dares to address. And if a young recruit, fresh to military life, finds himself bearing unacceptable behaviors from his own superior, who will dare to stand up for him? Who will speak up when fear silences everyone? Denis, a young recruit, joined the army with noble ideals, aspiring to serve his country, never imagining that this journey would turn into a battle not just with external enemies, but also within himself. At first, he thought growth would only come through physical challenges, through harsh training sessions. Yet these very challenges gradually brought him face to face with a different fear, a pain that defies rational explanation. Denis began to realize that in this environment, honesty and courage aren't always protected. When power is abused, when fear dominates, will Denis have enough courage to confront the truth, even if the cost might be his entire career and honor? Denis, a 25-year-old recruit from a middle-class family, always carried a resilience and steely spirit within him. Yet no one knew that beneath this strong exterior lay a rather reserved individual who followed every military rule, never seeking attention. To Denis, the army was a place where he could contribute and grow, a place where challenges only served to strengthen his body and mind. But in such a disciplined environment, he never imagined he'd face a situation with no rules to guide him. How could he choose between justice and silence when either could cost him what he held most dear? His fear did not come from external enemies, but from silent yet cruel things lurking within his own ranks. And then Roman appeared, a senior sergeant in the unit, respected not only for his leadership skills, but also for his courage and authority. But what he showed towards Denis was far from that respectable facade. Roman was a man whom no one dared to refuse, someone who commanded the admiration of the entire unit. Yet Denis sensed something unusual in Roman's actions. The lingering touches, the excessive compliments, and the suggestive looks Roman directed at him were far from those of a superior motivating a subordinate. Denis felt confused, unsure of how to respond. At first, Denis tried to convince himself that it was merely encouragement from a superior, a way for him to grow and adapt to military life. But as time passed, these actions became more frequent and blatant, making Denis feel that something was indeed amiss. He didn't know how to interpret Roman's behavior. Was it genuine concern or a scheme slowly unfolding? These signs began to infiltrate Denis's mind, trapping him in thoughts he couldn't quite understand. The closeness was not only unusual, but seemed to exceed the boundaries that should exist between a superior and a new recruit. How could he say no to someone respected not just for their rank but for the power they wielded? And was the price of that respect truly worth what he might lose? Roman began speaking about work, about tasks that needed to be completed, but his voice gradually dropped, taking on a tone that made Denis feel he was facing an entirely different confrontation. Roman's hand accidentally, or intentionally, patted Denis on the shoulder, a gesture Denis couldn't ignore. From the start, Denis had sensed something off in Roman's actions, but now he was intruding on Denis's personal space, and each touch became more obvious and harder to justify. "You're a resilient young man, Denis," Roman said, but his tone was no longer one of encouragement. It was laced with an inexplicable invitation. "I could help you rise to the next rank if you know how to play your cards right." That remark felt like a dark spot clouding Denis's mind. Confusion and discomfort arose, making him wonder what Roman was really implying. But before Denis could respond, Roman continued, "Whenever I need you, I'll expect you to comply with sexual services. Don't overthink it. It's just a part of military life." Denis froze, feeling as if everything around him suddenly blurred. He felt trapped in a situation with no way out. Roman's authority rendered Dennis unable to resist. He was just a new recruit, recently enlisted, and in everyone's eyes, Roman was an unchallengeable commander. Denise dared not speak up or resist for fear of losing everything, not only his job but also his career in the military, where everything depended on trust and authority. He felt torn between two choices. On one hand, he could stay silent, keep his position, his chances for promotion, and continue to deceive himself that everything would be fine. On the other, he could speak out, face the truth, but at the cost of potentially losing everything, facing ostracization from society and his comrades, being seen as disloyal. Both choices plunged him into an internal struggle with no way out. In that moment, Dennis looked into Roman's eyes full of power yet hiding something else, a contempt for him, a manipulation that Roman knew Dennis couldn't resist. A sense of helplessness rose within him. Every step Roman took now felt like an imposition. Every word he spoke was like an implicit threat, binding Dennis in thoughts filled with uncertainty and fear. Dennis knew that if he didn't comply, he would not only lose the chance for promotion but might also have his entire military career ruined. But if he did comply, what would he become? A submissive puppet, controlled by power, destroying himself in the process. That question had no answer, only a silence within him, like a wound that could never heal. As the months passed, Dennis gradually realized that life in the military wasn't just about physical challenges. He was facing a mental battle no less brutal. Roman's demands became increasingly explicit and impossible to refuse. Roman's power loomed like a dark shadow over Dennis's thoughts, trapping him inescapably. Every time Roman called him into his private office, it was no longer a simple meeting or discussion, but an invitation he couldn't decline, a silent demand he felt ensnared in. Each time Dennis felt himself slowly losing his own identity. He knew that if he spoke up, if he resisted, it would shatter not only his career but his honor and future as well. But if he kept silent, if he continued to endure, would he still be able to look at himself in the mirror each morning? The price of silence was not only his career but his very soul. Dennis could feel his spirit eroding day by day, as if each time he obeyed Roman's demands, a piece of his strength was drained. He couldn't tell anyone, he couldn't seek help. The unwanted touches, the hidden threats veiled as compliments, all of it made him feel as though he was living in an unending nightmare. Even when Oli, his only close friend in the unit, noticed his change, Dennis could only shake his head and stay silent. He couldn't reveal the truth, a horrifying truth that could destroy everything he had built. Every night as darkness fell, Dennis would sit alone in his room, unable to sleep. Thoughts spun in his mind, worries about the decisions he'd have to make. He could continue living in silence, but could he endure it any longer? Each day he felt like a puppet in someone else's hands, unable to resist, unable to escape. This sense of helplessness made him doubt himself. Was he still a soldier, a strong man, or just a weakling, incapable of standing up for himself? Denise stood frozen in front of Roman's office door, his hands trembling as he gripped the key, yet he couldn't move. His entire body felt paralyzed. Every time Roman called him, he knew what was coming. But this time, something felt different. Something inside him had changed. A small voice within him, not fear but a kind of determination, made him unable to endure any longer. "Denise, come in," Roman called from inside, his voice calm yet commanding. Dennis took a deep breath, then opened the door and stepped in. But this time, everything was different from before. The helplessness and confusion had now transformed into a simmering anger within him. When Roman gestured for him to come closer, Dennis stood still, unmoving. Roman's gaze was cold, devoid of any kindness, but Dennis couldn't take it anymore. He felt like he was on the edge, and if he didn't act now, he would lose his chance forever. "Dennis, what are you doing?" "Get over here and serve me as I requested." Roman's voice turned sharp. "No," Dennis choked out, his voice catching. "No, I'm not doing this anymore." Roman frowned, stepping closer, his face filled with rage. "You have no right to refuse me. I am your superior. You have no choice but to obey." Dennis felt anger surging within him. "No, I am not your puppet. I am a human being, and I have the right to say no." Roman sneered. then suddenly raised his hand and slapped Dennis across the face. The slap was so hard that Dennis's head snapped to the side, his ear ringing, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. But even in the pain, he didn't lower himself. He straightened, feeling the sting from the blow, but his gaze remained unwavering. "That's what you'll get if you dare to defy me," Roman growled, his hand clenched, ready to strike again. But Dennis, though in pain, didn't back down. He quickly wiped the blood from his mouth and looked Roman straight in the eye. "I am not afraid of you," Dennis said, his voice trembling but resolute. "You don't have this right. I won't let you humiliate me any longer." For a moment, the room fell silent, with only Roman's heavy breathing breaking it. He looked at Dennis as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard, but then he laughed, a mocking laugh. "Surprising, Dennis. You really think you can escape me?" Roman said, his hand sliding toward Dennis's collar. But Dennis didn't let him get closer. He shoved Roman hard, making him take a step back. "No," Dennis said, his voice firmer than ever. "You can't keep controlling me." In that moment, Dennis felt a shift within himself. The pain, the fear, all of it seemed to dissipate. He knew he couldn't continue living under this oppression. He wouldn't let Roman keep destroying him, and even if he had to face any retaliation, he wouldn't submit. Dennis turned and walked out of the room, leaving Roman standing there, furious and defiant. This feeling, though still tinged with anxiety, was one of liberation. He knew he had begun a battle not just for himself, but for all those who couldn't speak out. Ole had started noticing that something was wrong with Dennis. During their months together in the military, they had always been close friends, sharing everything with each other. But recently, Dennis wasn't himself anymore. He had become quiet, withdrawn, and the faint bruises on his body couldn't be hidden. Whenever Ole accidentally touched Dennis's arm or shoulder, he felt a clear tension, as if Dennis was avoiding any kind of contact. This feeling left Ole deeply concerned. One evening, after everyone had gone to sleep, Ole decided to find a way to talk to Dennis. He saw his friend sitting alone on his bed, staring distantly, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he was carrying an entire world of pain on his back. Ole approached him, trying to appear gentle, though he couldn't hide the worry in his voice. "Dennis, is something wrong? You don't seem okay, I can tell," Ole asked, attempting to keep a calm tone. Dennis remained silent for a few seconds, lowering his head to avoid Ole's gaze. A heavy silence filled the space. Ole could feel the fear in his friend, but he couldn't understand why Dennis had become like this. The bruises and scratches seemed to hint at something worse than the battles they had to face. "I'm just tired," Dennis replied shortly, not daring to look directly at Ole. "It's nothing." Ole knew that Dennis was hiding something, but he didn't know what to do. He sensed that this silence wasn't normal. The injuries couldn't be the result of training, and Dennis's evasive attitude only made Ole feel more certain that something terrible was happening. But he couldn't force Dennis to reveal the truth when even he didn't know how to help. Ole returned to his bed, his mind full of doubt and worry. He couldn't just let this go, yet he didn't know where to begin. How could he help Dennis when Dennis himself couldn't or wouldn't open up? This helplessness kept Ole awake all night, thinking about his friend, about what was really happening behind the walls of this military base. Dennis stood in front of the mirror, his eyes gazing at his own reflection, a soldier who once felt pride and resilience but now felt lost. Memories of what had happened kept circling in his mind, but he couldn't simply let them go. Every time he thought about speaking up, he was surrounded by unspoken questions. If everything came to light, what would happen to his career? How would his relationships with his comrades change? The doubt and pressure from those around him trapped him in a feeling of insecurity. He feared not only that his career would be destroyed, but also that the honor and respect he had built would disappear. The military was where he had devoted his youth, where he had found purpose, and he didn't want to lose everything over one wrong decision. Even in his clearest moments, Dennis couldn't find a way to face the truth. He knew that if he spoke up, nothing would be the same again. But if he remained silent, would everything be protected? He didn't know how to handle these thoughts. Part of him didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but another part felt that if he kept going like this, he wouldn't be able to endure much longer. That feeling spun endlessly in his mind, never stopping. Speak up or stay silent. Each choice had its consequences, yet Dennis couldn't find the right answer. After months of enduring in silence, Dennis finally decided to confide in his closest friend, Ole. However, he couldn't bring himself to say everything outright. "There are some things that I just can't talk about. But I can't keep going like this," Dennis said, his voice small and hesitant. His words made Ole feel that something was wrong, though he couldn't fully understand. Ole looked into Dennis's eyes, worry evident on his face. He could see his friend changing, but he wasn't sure if it was something serious. "What's going on, Dennis?" Ole asked, trying to persuade him but receiving no clear answer. Denise just stayed silent, unable to meet Ole's gaze. Ole began to sense that the situation might be very serious, but he couldn't act without clear evidence. He stood there, worried and confused, unsure of what to do next. Denise still couldn't open up, and Ole could only watch his friend with concern, wondering if he had the courage to reveal the truth. After months of threats and coercion, Dennis decided to report the incident to his superiors. Although he knew it was a risky move, he had no other choice. As soon as he filed the report, an official investigation was launched. The case quickly attracted attention, not only from military commanders but also from legal authorities. Dennis, as the victim, provided crucial details about Sergeant Roman's misconduct. However, investigators faced a major challenge: a lack of concrete evidence and ambiguous statements from witnesses. Meanwhile, Roman denied all accusations, claiming that his actions were merely standard training methods. The investigation was not only a challenge for those involved but also shook the entire unit. Everyone knew that a public case was no simple matter. It wasn't just a personal issue between Dennis and Roman, it was a systemic issue. Denise's comrades began to divide into two camps. One side supported him, while the other doubted him, believing he was fabricating the story to ruin Sergeant Roman's career. The pressure from both sides created a tense atmosphere, with questions about the truth remaining unanswered. This event completely changed the dynamics within the unit. The investigation was ongoing, but the final outcome remained uncertain as all parties involved continued to defend their interests. The investigation encountered numerous difficulties as Dennis's comrades and witnesses within the unit were fearful and unwilling to speak up. The fear of retaliation kept many silent. No one wanted to be entangled in this case. Some even thought Dennis was making it up, deliberately trying to bring down Sergeant Roman as an act of revenge. They didn't want to believe Dennis's accusations, considering them baseless. Dennis felt increasingly isolated. He wasn't only battling Roman's misconduct, but also facing injustice from his own comrades, the very people he had once trusted. The military system, supposedly built to uphold protection and honor, wasn't truly supporting the victim in this situation. Denise knew that seeking justice would be a long and arduous journey, with everything stacked against him. However, in the darkness of solitude, Ole, Dennis's closest friend, decided to step forward. Although he knew that testifying would expose him to significant risks and dangers, Ole couldn't stand aside. He realized that, no matter the consequences, justice had to prevail. Ole decided to testify, despite everything. After a tense investigation lasting several months, Roman was finally arrested on charges of sexual harassment and assault. Witnesses, despite their fear and anxiety, could no longer stay silent. Dennis's persistence and determination, along with Ole's support, helped those who had witnessed Roman's actions come forward and testify. The testimonies, combined with undeniable evidence, made it impossible for the case to be overlooked. In a tense courtroom trial, Roman was charged and prosecuted with no escape. Given the severity of his crimes, Roman was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Along with this sentence, his career was utterly destroyed. Once a respected officer and a role model in the eyes of many, Roman not only lost his reputation, but also his military privileges, making it impossible for him to return to any position in the future. His former comrades, those who once admired and trusted him, now had to face the bitter reality that the person they had called leader had abused his power to violate those under his command. Even though Roman was convicted, Dennis couldn't escape the trauma he had endured throughout this ordeal. Although the truth had been revealed, the emptiness within him couldn't be easily erased. Denise knew that, while he had won this legal battle, the pain he had endured would not disappear just because of a sentence. Though the case had reached its conclusion, Dennis couldn't avoid the feeling of emptiness. He was no longer the determined, proud soldier he once was. Even though he had triumphed in the legal battle, the pain of what he had endured still haunted him. Justice had been served, but at a cost he could never forget. Dennis knew that, in the eyes of many, he would always be seen as the victim, a label he would carry for the rest of his life. However, to him, this victory was an affirmation. Despite any cover-ups in the military system, with enough courage, the truth can still be heard. This case was not only punishment for Roman, but also a powerful reminder of the need for justice and accountability in the military environment. Roman would face his deserved punishment, but for Dennis, this battle marked a turning point in his life. He had not only defeated his abuser, but also proved that, even if the system could be flawed, justice could be found when one has the courage to face it. And although there would be many battles yet to fight, Dennis had learned that sometimes victory isn't just about the outcome, but about the ability to stand up when everything seems against you.